Hey guys, what's up? Hold on, I'm just making sure that I do have my microphone on. Okay, so this is the last reading of Beware Those Who Would Do You Harm. So, let's get into this, ladies and gentlemen. If you haven't heard of the other parts, I think you highly suggest going back to the other readings that I have done of this story so far, so you can get an idea on what's going on in the story and stuff, because if you just listen to this one, you'll be so confused. So as always, guys, let's get into this. Another good song they have for this track, though, Teenagers by My Chemical Romance. Very nice, very nice. Officer Thomas Jane and his rookie partner, Jade Mason, walked lazily through the cornfields, occasionally flashing their flashlight at every sound they heard. Officer Jane hated nights like this, when teens prank called the station, yet he was still obligated to check it out. He knew he wouldn't find anything, so he didn't object when Officer Mason suggested they stop for coffee. Even so, according to the operator, the kid who called sounded really calm, an unnatural sort of calm, like the kind that comes before a storm. That's pretty sus. He knew the kid, too. The one whose girlfriend went missing after her best friend disappeared not long after her parents were murdered. It seemed like ever since that boy came to town, there was just one bad thing after another. Oh, God. But why would the killer stay here? It didn't make any sense. The kid had to be mistaken. As soon as they reached the house, Officer Jane felt like there was something wrong. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something just didn't feel right. He turned to his partner. "Get your gun ready, Mason. I have a bad feeling about this." Officer Mason nodded solemnly and did as she was told. As soon as they opened the door, a powerful odor hit them. Officer Mason wouldn't know, but Officer Jane recognized that smell. It was the smell of death. Once again, he turned to his fellow officer. "I think we're going to need backup." After calling for backup, the two officers cautiously entered the house, not knowing whether or not the killer was still there. They decided to stick together at first. They searched all the rooms on the first floor, eventually making their way to the living room. Officer Mason let out a shriek as she shined her flashlight over the couches. When Officer Jane shone his flashlight as well, all he could utter was "Mother of God." There were corpses everywhere, of men, women, and children of all ages, and in various stages of decay. Gross. There must have been over a dozen of them. They were all posed in different positions, as if they were friends and families gathering together for afternoon tea. Oh my God, that's disturbing, yo. There were people slumped on the couch, reading a book, or sitting in a chair with a newspaper. Some were even sitting on the floor, posed as if playing a board game. Their mouths were agape, and their eyes were rolled to the back of their heads. Oh my God, yo. As the officers began to examine them, they recognized a few from the missing posters that had skyrocketed in recent months. Officer Mason had to leave the house to stroll outside. Officer Jane remained inside, wondering why there weren't any flies surrounding the bodies. As the officers made their way to the stairwell, they noticed the dry blood on the floor and the rail. Sorry. They gave each other a weary look and then continued on, guns at the ready. Once they reached the top floor, they split out and checked each room. Sorry, guys. Sorry, I lost where I was. Okay. They were all the same as the living room. More corpses. all posed in varying positions, their mouths and eyes agape. They were all at different stages of decay, some fresher than Officer Jane would have liked. Guess what kind of sick F are we dealing with? He murmured, to no one in particular. Jane, Officer Mason called from another room. I got something over here. Oh. Officer Jane followed her voice to the middle closet. Officer Mason wore a grave expression on her face. But she nodded towards the open door. Officer Jane took a deep breath and aimed his flashlight into the closet. Inside were the bodies of two teenage girls. One was a lot more decayed than the other, but there was something strange about the way they were positioned. They were leaning against each other, the eyes and mouths closed in what could have been a peaceful slumber. They were holding each other's hand, and wrapped around the two bodies was wrist string, tying them together. A tape on his shoulder startled Officer Jane, but before he could say anything, Officer Mason pointed above the heads of the bodies. Following her finger, Officer Jane saw that written in blood were the words, "Loved and lost." Officer Jane wondered what that meant, but he couldn't dwell on it right now. There was still one more room that they needed to check, and hopefully the killer was still hiding there. As they made their way to the end of the hall, they could hear sirens approaching. Their backup. Finally. It would take them a while to make it through the cornfields. Officer Jane didn't have time to go down and give them a briefing. He had to see what was in that last room. He looked at his partner, who looked back at him with a determined expression on her face. He knew she was afraid, but he also knew that she wanted to take this person down as much as he did. She would never forget this experience for the rest of her career. She could no longer be considered a rookie cop. Today, she had seen more than half the cops on the force, Things like this just didn't happen in their peaceful town. When they entered the last room, Officer Mason once again had to stop herself from throwing up. Lying on the bed was a young woman, her abdomen sliced open and her entrails falling out. Ugh. She was a fresh corpse. Officer Jane realized as he examined her. She was pretty too. Such a shame. They looked around for the killer, but they quickly realized he was long gone. There was a desk with a computer monitor on it, but the computer itself was gone. He must have found out we were coming. Officer Mason sniffed. Yeah, while we were out there taking our time, he was escaping. I wonder how he was able to use this computer. What? Officer Jane said, turning to her. Officer Mason looked stunned. The computer. How could he have used the internet when there's no signal or any electricity out here? How do we even know he used it? Well, why would he take it if he hadn't been using it? A monitor with no computer? That doesn't make sense. Yeah, Officer Jane didn't have much time to think about it, as he could hear the other officer coming through the door and calling out to them. I guess I'll go down and tell them the situation, seeing as how he's not here anymore. Alright, I'll stay up here and look around some more. As Officer Jane headed to the stairway, he tried to collect his thoughts. He was ready for this nightmare to be over, but he knew it wouldn't be for a long time. And what's worse? The killer had escaped because they hadn't taken the call seriously. Just as he reached the top of the stairs, he heard a shout coming from the room at the end of the hall. Officer Jane, followed by the other officers that had come as backup, ran to the room with their guns ready. But when they reached the room, it was empty. Empty save for the young girl who was already dead. In here, came a muffled voice from a small doorway. Officer Jane and the other officers slowly entered the room. A fresh metallic smell filled their noses upon entering. They all flashed their lights around the room. Lying on a bloody metal operating table was a teenage boy. His hands and feet were tied down, and his throat was slit. Ugh, my God. Officer Mason was leaning over him. "He's still warm," she said, her voice quivering as she tried not to cry. "This must be the boy who called 911, but came too late." "And that's not all," said an officer named Joe Rake, as Officer Jane confronted his partner. "It looks like we got a confession." All the officers simultaneously aimed their lights where Officer Rake was pointing his. On the wall above the boy's body, written in fresh blood, was a message. "Jeff was here." Oh my God, yo, that's disturbing. It was a good story, but that was disturbing, yo. I'm just picturing all this stuff in my head, like when they were saying about the bodies and shit, yo. Whew. I hope you guys enjoyed that video. As always, stay safe and take care. Bye-bye.